Do you think rules reform will be an advantage for Somerville?
Oh, it sure will.
How?
Well, openness in general always helps people that are in need. I mean, Somerville is in need more than other communities, I believe.
Do you think
openness will always help those that need it? When it's closed is when those who have it keep having it.
And you see rules reform as the solution to that in the legislature?
Yes.
As far as I'm concerned, the legislator isn't going to reform. The state legislator isn't going to reform. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, everything is cut and dried. They have priorities, special interests that they've been taken care of for years, and I don't believe it's going to change overnight.
Do you think if it could change, it would be a good thing?
I don't know, but I think any change for better has got to be good.
So would you vote for a candidate who's for rules reform? Is that one of the issues you look at?
Yes, I definitely will vote for those who are for the rules reform.
I think there should be rules reform, actually. Yeah.
So you would definitely vote for a candidate who's for rules reform?
Yes, I would.
You elect an official, and you expect that that official has one vote, and that other officials that other people elect also have that one vote. And the way the rules are now, the leadership actually has control over blocks of votes. And, you know, if you don't go along with the leadership, you don't get your limousine, you don't get the nice offices, you know. So I think that making the general court more democratic really is an important thing, I think.
You would definitely want to know what a candidate's stand is on rules reform.
I think that the candidates have to be involved positively in rule reform rather than being entrenched in the system, which I think, you know, there are people running right now that are somewhat entrenched in the system.
Well, some people would make the point that someone who's entrenched in the system and is close to the leadership can get more for Somerville than just one legislator could under rules reform. How do you feel about that? Do you think Somerville is going to be better off or worse off after rules reform?
It's really hard to say. You know, Somerville's leadership has been over the years fairly powerful in the State House. I think that's simply because they've backed the right person, quote unquote, all the time. And, you know, it's a favor kind of thing. I think if instead of doing things that way, people form their coalitions together. I mean, I think that Somerville has a lot in common with a lot of neighborhoods in Cambridge and a lot of neighborhoods in Medford and a lot of neighborhoods in Malden. And, you know, if the representative is involved and the senator is involved, work together for, you know, their areas in caucus and in committee and whatever, I think it would be actually better for the entire area than to have, say, one person who can control 30 votes because he's a friend of the leadership or he's a member of the leadership. I think it's, you know, those coalitions seem to me to be a more democratic way to do things.
Good evening, and welcome to the live portion of Dead Air Live. 1 week from tonight is the primary, and as you've heard from some of those on-the-street interviews and people expressing their concerns, there are many important issues behind the candidates. We've heard quite a bit about and specifically things that the candidates have said. And one of the races in particular for Somerville and Medford, the 2nd Middlesex District, has achieved a lot of attention here. Albano, Pirro, and Maloney are the 3 candidates who've gotten a lot of attention in that race. But there's some very real and important issues behind those candidates. And tonight on Dead Air Live, the producers group would like to focus attention on those issues. With me here in the studio are 3 guests, and I'd like now to be able to introduce them to you. Starting and going around. First is Warren Banbury. Warren is a longtime advocate for reform in government in Somerville, a member of several local citizen groups. Welcome, Warren.
Thank you.
Next, we have Rick Ann Hadrian. Rick Ann is a political organizer, is a staff person for Common Cause. Common Cause parenthetically as a nonpartisan citizen action group. Welcome, Rick Ann.
Good evening.
And finally, we have, going around in order here, Frank Ackerman. Frank is professor of economics at University of Massachusetts and also works on the Somerville Community News.
Hi.
Good evening. I'm glad that you all could come tonight, and as we've seen from the just that little portion of on-the-street interviews, some of the issues that concern people have to do with, we've already heard one of the major ones is rules reform. Some of the other ones that we want to talk about tonight will have to do with campaign funding, and will have to do with city finances, and I guess a theme that's kind of running through this election, and maybe in some ways has been a kind of veil over the city of Somerville for a long time, is the issue of integrity, or possibly corruption in some ways is the other side of that. Any immediate comments, thoughts people had on some of the on-the-street interviews that we just saw?
I thought they were very interesting and to the point that we all are interested in. I was particularly interested in the comments made by, I think, the last speaker when he talked about the reform issue and how the question comes as to whether somebody that cooperates with it or doesn't cooperate with it gets more success for their community. It's my feeling, and it has been my feeling for years, that the function of a legislator is to go to Beacon Hill and get what he can for his constituents back, whether it be in Somerville and in the instance of the Senate race in Somerville and Medford. And I noticed during the campaigns that we're going through now, there's been a lot of issue relative to what our present representative has done for us. Many of the things that he brings up, I maintain, are standard procedure and should be done by a legislator. I would hope in the future that our legislators that we send to Beacon Hill will be for reform, and at the same time will still be able to bring back to their constituents in the city of Somerville and Medford everything that we have coming to us. So I felt that the gentleman made a good point.
I know that one of the things that we'll want to really talk about, the sort of notion of rules reform, has been spoken of, but it's not necessarily clear what that is. And I know coming up in a little while we have a tape from Senator George Bachrach, and that'll, I think after that tape, give us more of an opportunity to look at that. But other thoughts just generally on, it seems like a lot of people are going to say, well, they're in favor of rules reform.
Right. For me, it's really exciting to see those on-the-street interviews, because 2 years ago, people, if you asked them a question, what do you think about rules reform in the state legislature, wouldn't even know what that meant. Even though organizations have been working on the issue for years and years in Massachusetts and in other states also. It's just absolutely exciting to see that the everyday person on the street knows what rules reform is all about today. They might not know the specifics, they might not know exactly how the legislature works, but people know what's important to them as far as their elected representatives are concerned. That's what this country is all about. And I think it's very important for any of the representatives who are running for office to watch something like that and realize that the normal person on the street really does care about who they elect, and also does know the issues well enough and have an opinion about what's going on. The Coalition for Legislative Reform, which is a coalition of lots of different kinds of groups, a diverse mixture from the Republican State Committee to CPPAC's Coalition for Reform, collected over 120,000 signatures on a rules petition last fall. Over 2,000 of those signatures were collected here in Somerville, and there were over, I would say, 35, 40 people working in Somerville on the street collecting those signatures. One of the leaders of that was Sal Albano here, as well as Bob Lasky, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. But that's what it's all about, you know, going out on the street and actually talking with people about something like rules and having them really respond, and they feel deeply about the issue. They don't want Tom McGee and Billy Bolger to control everything anymore, and they don't want their legislators to handle their jobs the way they have been in the past. So.
Maybe before we get more into this, because there's obviously a great deal to be said about it, there is a tape that we have, and if I can just for people watching the show tonight, remind you that one of the things we really want is for you to call in and give us your opinion on a lot of the issues that we're going to be discussing. So later on in the show, please sort of note all your questions, save them up, and later on in the show we'll be putting up a phone number and requesting call-ins. But before we do that and come back live to the studio, let's now take a look at the tape of Talking with George Bachrach.
Ready? Okay. We're speaking now with State Senator George Bachrach, who has been instrumental in proposing rules reform for the Massachusetts State Senate. Senator, many people don't understand what rules reform is. Can you tell us what rules you would like to see changed and how these changes will affect the way things are done in the Senate?
Well, the simplest way to describe it is that right now we have a strongman form of government where all power in the state legislature is in the hands of one man, Bill Bulger in the Senate, one man in the House, Tom McGee. We want to make it a more open and democratic process where all members share in how this institution is run. Under the present system, for example, President Bulger appoints all committee chairmen with a concomitant pay increase. Under the same system, one man, Bill Bulger, hands out a $7,500 check to all chairmen. One man, Bill Bulger, controls all the creature comforts of the buildings, from typewriters to office space to paper clips. Under the same system, Bill Bulger controls the legislative flow. There isn't a bill that gets through this process that he doesn't want to have get through. We can change those rules by rooting the chairmanships in the membership, diminishing the pay, and developing a system whereby every member has his own office allowance and isn't dependent on the Senate President being on his good side for their office space and paper clips.
And what examples can you think of that would not occur under the proposed changes?
I don't think we'd have the kinds of abuses of power that we've had in the past, midnight sessions where buildings like the Commonwealth Armory are given away to BU for a song in the dead of night, where lifetime jobs are handed out to political cronies, like the Convention Center Authority job that is $72,000 a year for life. That went to Bill Bulger's former assistant. Those things happen because people are afraid to challenge the president for the simple reason that he has all that power. That's what we're trying to change.
Well, this seems to be a struggle for power in the legislature. How do you think this will relate materially to the voters of a city like Somerville?
Well, under the present system, whether you're liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, you're really not getting a fair hearing. If people want to come up here on a health care bill, or they want to come here on a housing bill, or any other kind of bill, they hope to get a fair hearing. But under this system, it's not 40 members of the Senate that make a judgment, it's 1 or 2 members of the Senate. And if they don't approach that person right, if they're not on their good side, as I've said before, their chance of getting that bill through are very, very slim. That's not right.
Do you think that there's a large support for rules reform among voters that you're aware of? And how can Somerville voters have any effect on the way the legislature conducts its business?
Well, the answer is yes. I think there is a lot of support out there. I get cab drivers that roll down their windows and honk their horns at me and tell me to go get them. I think people are fed up. They're frustrated. They're annoyed with picking up their morning papers or watching shows like yours and seeing the kind of corruption that goes on here. 120,000 citizens signed an initiative petition to change the rules of the legislature. But people shouldn't think of it in terms of rules. They should think of it in terms of a more open, more honest, more accountable government. That's what we're trying to do here. How the people of Somerville can affect this is very easy. Send us a senator that knows the difference between right and wrong. Send us a senator that says no to midnight sessions, no to lame duck sessions, no to lifetime jobs for political cronies. You've got a clear choice in Somerville. You've got couple of candidates from Somerville that are on opposite sides of this issue. You've got a fellow named Vin Pirro that thinks this system that goes on here is just fine, has been a strong advocate of it for many, many years. And you've got a fellow named Sal Albano who's willing to stand up on his hind legs and say, let's change it. There's a clear choice.
How did this power in the hands of a few come about? Has it always been this way, do you think?
No, it's gotten much worse over the last 10 years or so. First of all, the decline of the two-party system has given the majority power so much of a majority that they don't have to be sensitive to anybody anymore. They have the votes regardless of whose feet they step on. Secondly, the pay discrepancy has gotten to be so great these days that, you know, when you hand somebody a $7,500 bonus check, that person's grateful to you, particularly when they know that that one person, the Senate President, can take it right back away from you. We hadn't had those kind of pay bonuses in the past. We have them now, and it creates a pecking order and a system of obligation that is just bad.
I understand that you're running against Mr. Bulger for the position of Senate President. What do you hope to accomplish with this, and how do you think individual senators can affect the legislature?
Well, I simply want to raise these kinds of issues. I want to make it clear that I don't like the way the state Senate is run. And, you can just go on so long here looking the other way. After a certain point, you wonder whether you're part of the solution or part of the problem. I don't want to be part of this problem. I want to develop a new majority in the state Senate, people representing districts like yours that know the difference between right and wrong. And that's why I'm running for Senate President. This is not the presidency of IBM. This is the presidency of a democratic legislative institution. And if you don't like the way it's run, and I don't, then you've got an obligation to stand up and say so.
Okay. Do you have any last comments that you'd like to make about the reform?
I just think it's important that the public understand they have a role to play here. And if they send us senators that don't understand this issue and don't stand up for democracy, then they get the kind of government they deserve. And if they send us good senators, then there is some chance that we can recapture this institution and make it a place we can believe in again.
Okay.
We're back live now, and any reactions to a lot of fairly strong and very clearly spoken statements by Senator Bachrach? Frank?
Well, I was impressed at how real he made the issue seem. I have often had trouble, and people I know have had trouble understanding just what is this rules reform and why are we involved with it. It certainly has been the case with issues I've followed, like tax reform, problems about electric rate increases, problems about insurance rates, any of those kind of issues that have come up over the years. You get to the legislature, you try to lobby them, you find, well, it's not really the legislature, it's something about this committee or that committee, and just a few people. So that again and again, I think a lot of people in Somerville have been involved in issues that have been thwarted at the legislature, and it's an impressive sign of the sophistication of a lot of people, that people understand that's where the problem is, that this little group is holding things down. And the fact that for years we've had a state rep here, Vinnie Pirro, who claimed to be fairly high up that pyramid, that hasn't made things roll through. We've tried that route, and that hasn't worked. That has not made all the community groups and all the citizen initiatives that have come out of Somerville be suddenly successful just because Vinnie Pirro has been there.
You mentioned like a small group, and I know Senator Bachrach said sort of strong arm, not sure exactly what the phrase was, strong arm kind of politics. And maybe it would be useful just to go over again, I mean, when we talk about rules reform, what is the condition in the Senate and the House that people want reformed? What is business as usual at this point?
Well,
Okay.
business as usual at this point means that the Senate President and the House Speaker appoint all committee chairs and appoint all people to leadership positions. None of those are elected by the rank and file. They're all appointed by those two men. All of the office staff, space, allocation of pencils to typewriters to whether or not you get a computer to send letters to your constituents, to phones, to whatnot, are also controlled by those two people. Those are two very important things, and those are things that people care about.
How are office space issues so important to a citizen in Somerville or Medford?
Well, there's an old story that goes back to someone who used to be a representative who's now running for a congressional seat right now, who voted a particular way on a bill that the Speaker didn't like 4.5 years ago, and when he came back to his office office was gone, his desk was out in the hallway, his staff was fired, and he literally had no ability to serve his constituency anymore because he didn't have an office space out of which to work in the State House.
That may not be what they mean by responsive government.
Right, right. So basically, two people control everything as far as how committees work, when committees meet, who, those people who run those committees are in debt and must go hat in hand to these two men who run the whole show. So, representative government is not the case in Massachusetts right now.
The other issue that we all talked about before the show, in addition to office space, was what happens to bills.
Right.
And maybe that's, since the purpose of the legislature is passing of certain laws, what determines what bills and issues come up for debate, what laws get passed?
Right. There are 3 key committees that all bills can get bottled up in, and most people don't know about them, but it's a committee on third reading.
Now, is this in the House?
This is the House and the Senate.
Both?
Right. Ways and Means Committee are the 2 primary ones, and once again, both of those committee chairs are appointed by McGee and Bulger, so they obviously have to report back to McGee and Bulger. Those bills that go to those committees can sit there for as long as possible and die, and that's where most of the bills do get clogged up. So if you care about your housing bill or your education bill or whatever it may be, it can be held in that committee and you have no means to get it out. There's no vehicle to call for roll call votes. In fact, the way that the legislature works is you could go up to the State House on any given day and not even know what the calendar looks like, not even know what your representatives are discussing.
So how do bills get out?
Very good question. I think they basically get out by the control of a very few people up there who see a bill like a bill and get it out because they either owe someone a favor or someone pushes them hard enough and says that they'll come back and return the favor at some future point. Bills aren't even in print when the legislators vote on them, and that's one of the things in the initiative petition, and also one of the things that the House did pass last fall because of all the petition pressure.
When you say initiative petition, you're referring to what?
Well, there's an initiative petition that the Coalition for Legislative Reform collected signatures on, which is what Senator Bachrach referred to. That petition didn't get through the court. Unfortunately, the Supreme Judicial Court overturned a decision that they made in '78 which said that people and voters of Massachusetts could change the rules of the legislature by the initiative petition process, which means that it goes on the ballot, similar to how the bottle bill was passed here. They overturned that decision and said that, unfortunately, the only people who can change their rules are the people there who operate under the rules the way they are right now, which is the legislature. So unfortunately, the Supreme Judicial Court said that the citizens don't have the right to really do that on their own by the initiative petition process.
Perhaps this would be a good point to hear from the candidates themselves, Pirro, Albano, and Maloney in the 2nd Middlesex District, in terms of what they think about rules reform. Come back and maybe then try to think more about some of what are some of the other related issues to rules reform, and what kind of government do we want to have, who is supporting the different candidates in terms of campaign funds, what are the issues about the monies necessary to operate cities, and how all this, although it seems very puzzling in some ways, kind of fits together. So let's now take a look at that tape of the candidates' night.
There's a power blockage at the state legislature. In both houses of our state legislature, power is concentrated in the hands of a few people. And whenever that happens, you know you're going to have abuses. And we certainly have a lot of abuse at the state legislature. Currently, nothing can happen in the state legislature unless Bill Bulger and Tom McGee want it to happen. And if they don't want it to happen, it just doesn't. And in order to get any good legislation through that legislature that would benefit our district, we have to have rules reform. The rules must be changed in order that each elected representative can represent their constituency instead of Bill Bulger and Tom McGee. And
let me say one thing about rules reform. I have been in Medford local official for the past 8 years. And I've read in the paper recently where Speaker McGee and President Senator Bulger, people are so concerned on rules reform. I am too. I want to vote for the people's rights and the people's needs. I want my voice counted, my vote counted, in public, not in private. I think we should have an open door policy. I think our democracy today calls for that. As far as rules reform, when I get up to the Senate and be the next senator, I will look at what they're looking for to reform rules. That's what it says. Rules reform, reform rules. I believe in an open process form of government, and yes, I believe there should be some reform.
I certainly supported rules reform. In fact, the first roll call of the 1984 legislative session on January 10th, a motion by Nick Paleogolis of Woburn, a prime motivating factor for rules reform and for having our sessions televised. I voted for this comprehensive rules reform package. In examining my rules reform roll call votes, I voted for all substantive rules reform changes, except, and I make a strong exception to these, most of the rules reform changes and roll calls offered by Mr. Robinson of the Republican Party, because his were delaying tactics and rules reform changes based upon the Republican point of view that would have absolutely no benefit to the people of the city of Somerville, which I represent. I think rules reform is good.
I think the most important issue is rules reform. And it's important because other issues flow from that. What has been happening in the past year is that there has been a measure of power taken from the Speaker of the House and distributed to the members through the process of rules reform. What has to happen is that has to continue. What we really need, and again, I don't want to hop on this, but I will, is the Speaker of the House has enormous power and prestige and influence and money and staff. So when rules are proposed, they normally will try and retain their power no matter what the rule is. What we have to have is a legislator, a person who's there every day to prevent them from circumventing those rules. And if you look at the rules currently in force, you would say, you know, what's the problem here? I mean, they're clear-cut, but there is a circumvention that takes place. And I think the full-time aspect of being a state representative is vital. We have to come up with rules that prevent voting on bills that aren't in print. People are amazed when they find out that legislators will vote on something they've never even read. We have to come up with what is called one of the proposals is a steering and policy committee, which would stress the issues and also nominate committee chairmen and members of the leadership. I think those are important. They may not have to be binding, but at least if someone is willing to say, well, we want someone who's an expert in tax law to be the tax committee. We want someone who knows about health care to be on the health care committee.
One of the candidates has made rules reform his only issue. That's his issue. I make effectiveness my issue. He talks about rules reform. Rules reform is a non-issue as far as I'm concerned, but I'd like to discuss it anyway because in the House the rules are different than they are in the Senate because you have so many more people that are involved. We have 160 members in the House. There are only 40 members in the Senate. So people that were in power sometimes did not share that responsibility with the regular member. I have never had a problem with that because I've been in leadership almost from the first term that I was in the House.
I think I hear two, if not three, major issues. One is I'm hearing very much the concern about the way the State House conducts its business, the concern about the very tight control of the leadership, and the fact that citizens don't have the kind of input into the legislative process. And I think they're rather frustrated. And I think that was indicative, Laura, by the 120,000 signatures gathered across the Commonwealth calling for rules reform, calling for a change in the way business as usual is conducted on Beacon Hill. And I think they're tired of the leadership, and they want a leadership change, but they know to do that they need a membership change.
Okay, rules reform is an issue.
Back live now. Let me please invite people to give us a call with your thoughts about any of the issues that you think are important in these upcoming primary elections. Our number here is 628-8826. While we're waiting for calls to roll in, let me play devil's advocate in some way, and there's been a lot of talk about rules reform. I guess the other side of rules reform is, doesn't it take someone who is close to the leadership, who knows the way things work on Beacon Hill, to be really effective and really serve the interests of the community? And don't you need that kind of relationship with the people in power to really serve the interests of your constituency? How would you respond to that, Warren?
I don't think that's the case, and that's the point that I was trying to make earlier with the response that was given in the first segment. I think certainly somebody has to know, somebody that's a legislator has to know what's going on back in his community. And particularly since Proposition 2.5 has come into effect in Massachusetts, there's a great deal that a legislature can do relative to his community. I have felt since the beginning of Proposition 2.5 that Somerville has fared extremely well. They've done better than 95% of the communities in the Commonwealth. But I, as many others, don't see that it's going to be able to continue that long. I don't see the state being able to help us the way they have since the beginning of Proposition 2.5. And I think it's incumbent upon our legislators to do something about it, whether it be in the area of bringing more industry into our community so that we can build our tax base, particularly in Somerville. Somerville is land poor, as everybody knows. Very hard for us to expand anywhere in the city. These other communities in the Commonwealth where building is going on a daily basis, new houses, new industry moving in, it's not that easy in Somerville, but there are many ways that it can be done. We now have in the city several programs in effect for building, and one of the prime ones that I'm concerned with is 121A proposals. This is this is a package that's put together at the state that allows a developer to come into a community and know for the next 40 years what he's going to pay in taxes.
Well, if we want to attract business to a community like Somerville, isn't that in the interest of the community?
Oh, I believe it is, because there are many ways to generate additional funds through the 121A process. And Springfield is a perfect example. Springfield uses this constantly. They have the most 121As of anybody in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Each one of them has been a success upon success and has generated a great deal of new jobs in the city, plus additional funds, and has allowed Springfield to survive under Proposition 2.5. And I think we can do that in Somerville, and I'm sure Medford is similar in situation. In the past, the 121As that Somerville has been involved with have been ones that one would not look back to repeat. And in fact, they've all...
A short answer for a difficult to respond to that, I know. But
no, they're all problems, and they have been where outsiders have come into the city and sold, in most instances, the Board of Assessors, and in some instances, the Board of Aldermen, a bill of goods, and then walked away with the city. But that is not what 121As are all about. Unfortunately, Somerville was taken in every instance of their 121As. And they're owed a substantial amount of money now by the people that had come into the city. I would like to see this corrected, and Somerville take advantage of what is available to them.
Well, given that, yeah, Frank.
But Warren, as you were saying, Somerville is land poor. There's very little space for this kind of new development. And to think that we're better off than most of the Commonwealth is shocking, because we've lost school teachers, we've lost library staff, we've lost fire and police, we've lost services everywhere that are crucial to life in a city like this. And it makes me think that we just have to talk about where the state aid will come from, where the federal aid will come from if we ever got a decent federal government again. That the money isn't there in the cities, especially after Proposition 2.5. You can't run a city on the money the city creates. And that makes it all the more important who's representing us at that next higher level, where the financial decisions are increasingly made.
I guess that's one of the things I was wondering, given that there, I'm sure, is no disagreement about finances in the city historically and currently are a major issue, even though the city's been fortunate in terms of the local aid coming back to not have been just completely devastated by Proposition 2.5. What is the role that legislators can play, and therefore how does this have an impact on, we're a week away from largely selecting two House of Representative people and a state senator. So what is the role of a legislator and the impact they can have given what a crucial issue city financing is?
Well, I think tax reform certainly is a major issue, and one of the things that has been discussed over the years, and I don't know where it stands at the moment, but originally was the King-Webby bill, and it's probably now the Dukakis-Webby bill, but it's not a bill, it's a case going through the court system to have the state take over 100% of the educational costs to equalize the educational system in the Commonwealth. And that certainly is a step in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. If the state would assume the total cost of education in the Commonwealth, I think that's a major step forward.
There's, I think, a lot more to be said about the role the legislators can play. I got a cue that we have a phone call, so I'm getting another cue that we don't have a phone call. Oh, phone number. Okay, I'm getting a cue that I should say the phone number, which I will do. 628-8826. This is another invitation to people to please give us a call with issues that you think are important, thoughts that you have about this upcoming primary election and about the issues we're talking about. So since we don't have a phone call, we can, sorry, I cut you off. I guess more thoughts there around, I mean, obviously the other major reform that has caught a lot of attention in the last number of years, we're talking now about rules reform, but it's been tax reform. And again, I guess a week shy of the primary, coming back to what can legislators do in terms of, and given that Somerville is a land poor community that's very vulnerable to cuts in funding, et cetera. Other thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think that how much money there is in your child's school ought to depend on how many businesses are in your town. If you move 2 blocks over the line from Somerville to Cambridge, your child goes to a school which is more than twice as well funded per pupil. And that seems to me ridiculous. They're both citizens of the same country, of the same state. They may play together because they live next door. One side of the line, one goes to a fairly poor school. The other side of the line, they go to a well-funded school. I would like to see the legislature move to equalize the level of those kind of services throughout the Commonwealth, that we all have a responsibility to each other's children. Somerville has a responsibility to help finance even poorer communities, and the even wealthier communities in the suburbs have a responsibility to help finance places like Somerville. So that there's a lot of...
The legislature to do what, therefore?
Because the legislature is going to be financing schools, say, more and more, because legislative aid to the localities is going to finance schools, it ought to be equalized much more sharply than it is now, so that you don't have those disparities, so that the bottom is brought up. There's some minimum below which schools or firefighters or any other kind of services don't fall just because a community is land poor, just because it's business poor. Its citizens have the same rights that people in the suburbs have to have decent services provided.
That's a nice lead-in to, we have another videotape, unplanned. The videotape is planned, the lead-in wasn't. And I guess what we've really gotten to is that we're beginning to generalize more from rules reform to a variety of other kinds of issues. And the producers group went out on the streets and talked with more people about what they thought were important issues in this upcoming election. And let's take a look at that tape now.
What do you think are the important issues in the primary and the election?
Well, issues for me are always honesty and responsiveness to people like me.
Mm-hmm. How do you decide what candidates you're going to vote for?
Well, one way is I read their brochures, and then I also belong to some other political groups like Mass Fair Share, and I trust their opinion. Mm-hmm. The water tax increase is a significant issue to me. But at the state level, openness in the meetings is very important to me too.
So I think, for one thing, we think we're getting a lot of something for nothing here, and we're not. Especially all this this improvement. We're not getting something for nothing because the government has allowed us so much money. It's still got to filter down back to us regardless. They've torn up beautiful sidewalks and putting in bricks for nothing. All for nothing. All a waste of money. Could have been better used for old people, a better life for old people, or even for young children in schools or anything else.
So education and human issues are important to you too?
A hell of a lot more than ripping up good sidewalks and putting down brick, which you'll stumble over when the ice is on.
Well, I would have to study the issues a little more before I'd make a statement about them.
Which issues are important to you? Which ones do you look at when choosing a candidate?
A representative's questions and actions in the Senate, how he votes for the elderly affairs.
Elderly is important too.
Elderly is very important to me. Elderly and handicapped, very important.
Well, first of all, The most important thing to me is honesty. And it's very hard to find in politics today. And in Somerville recently, I'm very, this is my hometown, and I'm a little bit upset about what's been going on. And I don't know whether they just singled Somerville out or if it's true, whatever. But I mean, I have been a little more interested in it because it is my hometown, and I'm a little bit proud of it, even though it sounds like sometimes it's going down the drain, you know. And
other than the issue of honesty, what other issues are important to you when you think about
many things? Taxes, good roads, youth organizations, especially in this city. We do need it, and we don't have it. We have a few, but it doesn't, there's nothing for the young girls to go to. We have a couple for the boys. We have a boys club, and we have the Somerville Boxing Club, but girls don't box, as a rule, and they don't go to boys clubs. But I think, to me, because I don't have any children myself, but I do have young nieces and nephews, and they have nowhere to go. As far as they have to stay home.
We're back live again, and Warren just made a good observation about the one of the last people. It may be true that girls don't box, but it is the Boys and Girls Club, so to set the record straight about that. There is a place for girls to go, even not that we're encouraging boxing, but we do have another tape coming up, and I think it's interesting to hear a lot of what people on the streets have to say, which really has to do with, I think, wanting government to be responsive to those kinds of concerns that they have, to things that have an immediate kind of impact on their lives. Some of what we've been suggesting here is that it's government, because of the lack of rules reform, has not always been responsive in that way. The next tape that we have is further discussion by candidates for the State House of Representatives and for the State Senate on issues of concern to them and their stand on those issues. Let's now go back and look at more of that tape.
What do you perceive to be the most critical issue in this campaign?
Well, I think that tax reform has got to be at the top of my agenda, at least. We've got to, we can no longer afford to pay for city services off the backs of the small property owners, which has gone on for years. Now that Proposition 2.5 is here to stay, I believe, we can't afford to pay for those city services. They're going to continue to diminish over the years as we have more and more inflation. Being able to increase our budget by 2.5% will no longer pay for those services. So we have to look to new sources of revenue, and I believe that the state certainly has the best resources for raising those revenues, and I believe that the state has to then give back to the cities and towns that revenue in the form of local aid, in the form of school aid. But the formulas for distributing that money have got to change so that it favors cities like Somerville and Medford. Presently, they favor the more affluent communities. And that's done with a purpose in mind. That's done by the leadership so that they can keep control of the legislators from those districts. And that's why I'm so hepped up about rules reform, because until that happens, we're not going to get any effective tax reform.
Education is one of my priorities and will be my priority when I become the next state senator in the district. I feel that Proposition 2.5 that was voted in by the taxpayers of the city of Somerville and Medford, we need it. It is good. The only thing, education wasn't looked at. The schools and education purposes have been cut down. We're closing schools, and we may have to. But I believe that the dollar spent for the educational needs of our youth, who are our youth today and will be our leaders of tomorrow, must be upgraded.
Job opportunities are very pressing. We want to have fair employment for all our young people, and that's the prime motivating factor. But also, we have a lot of other issues, such as fair wages for people on our public payrolls. This is very important.
What can you do about that in the legislature, though?
We can appropriate sufficient wages for them, or see that local aid gets the sufficient funds to pay them. Somerville, by the way, has done extremely well on local aid this year. We have sent back the city of Somerville $37,600,000 in local aid.
I think the education issue is the one I've talked most about. We've talked about that already here this afternoon. Other issues that are certainly coming up are the rules reform issue, the tax reform issue, which we've touched upon. And those types of issues are ones I would like to get involved in.
The major issue I think that I'm encountering as I go door to door with people is the question of the water and sewer rates. I think it's outrageous that the city has done what they've done with that particular issue. What the problem has been is not just the retroactivity of the payments or the increase, but rather a consistent pattern of refusal on the part of both the mayor and the alderman, not just my two opponents, and not just the current mayor, but city government in general, to recognize that water is a commodity, and commodities have prices, and it's fiscal suicide not to price something at its cost.
As we've seen since Proposition 2.5, we certainly need to strengthen our state aid, the funding that the state is going to has promised to give us back in the communities. I think I'd like to look into the lottery system. I think the city spends, the people of this community spend an awful lot of money on the lottery games, and a lot of that lottery money is supposed to be spent, it's supposed to be reimbursed, that is, from the state back to the communities with a formula for schools, for education. And that maybe that formula should be readdressed, and maybe we should be looking so that we get a little better share of that money.
The principal issue, as I see it, is who can perform and bring home the effective services to the city of Somerville that they so desperately need. You know, when people run for state office, there's no one particular issue, whether it's local aid or whether it's more housing for the elderly or whether it's better meal program or better health insurance. Those are issues that in the legislature they're going to be confronted regardless of who is the senator. But what the principal interest I see is that who can do the best job for the city? Who can represent the city most effectively?
Hi, we're back live again, and I know we had one or two calls during some of the inserts, so let me please encourage people to persevere and give us a call again now, because we're going to be talking live in the studio. The number again, 628-8826. One of the things that I wanted to have an opportunity to talk about is, since this is an election that's coming up, not only what happens in the legislature itself, and not only about monies to run the city, but monies to run campaigns. And I guess the next question, and a lot of the attention this year has focused on, especially Albano and Pirro and Maloney in terms of that state senate race. Frank, I know you have done, on the heels of the Disclosure Act, which means that we can find out about who's contributing to what campaign, who is behind some of these different candidates.
I heard rumors about who was financing Pirro, who was financing Albano. So I went and looked at the reports which they're required to file with the state, the campaign finance reports for the entire year 1983 for Vincent Pirro and for Sal Albano. And I looked through them. First of all, they have very different totals. In that year, 1983, this is a year in which Albano was running for re-election. Albano raised $10,000. In that same year, Pirro was not running for re-election. Pirro raised $120,000, 12 times as much money. The size of the contributions is very different. Pirro's contributions are big. There are almost no contributions under $100. 99% plus of Pirro's money comes in checks of $100 or more. Almost none of Albano's money comes from checks that large. The great majority of Albano's money, over 80%, comes in smaller checks, smaller than 100. And in terms of the geographical location, Sal Albano is a local candidate. 80% of his money comes from Somerville and Medford. Vinnie Pirro raises money from all over the place, and I can't figure out where it's coming from. It's coming from political action committees in downtown Boston. It's coming from box numbers in towns on the South Shore. It's coming from people in Georgia in a few cases. He's raising money, 90% of it outside Somerville and Medford. Only 10% of his funds come from the district. So they have very different financial bases. Pirro.
I wonder if I can interrupt. I got this call who was waiting on the insert. I think the next, that's the differences are striking. I guess the next thing is what kind of conclusions can we draw? So can I put you on hold and take the caller who's been on hold off hold, see if they're still here. Hello, this is the Dead or Alive Primary Concerns Show. Did you have a question or comment?
Yes, I did have a question for the panel concerning the initiative petition and what's being done currently to appeal the decision of the state Supreme Court. And it seems to me rather odd that, you know, here we have an issue which concerns corruption within the state legislature, and what we're doing is turning around to the legislators themselves and asking them to clean their own dirty laundry. And I'm interested in knowing what the Coalition for Legislative Reform is doing to pursue the issue, if anything at all.
Anyone want to has some familiarity with that and wants to tackle that? Can you stay on in case you have another comment?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Well, the coalition collected 120,000 signatures last fall, and then after we lost the court decision, we kept together and we formed a 10-point package that came from the petition, which is a questionnaire that went out to all of the candidates. It's what I referred to earlier, about 275 of the candidates responded. Here it is right there.
Camera is now searching for the form that's being held up.
And the headlines that we've seen from newspapers all over the state indicate that it is a top issue, not only in Albano and Piro's campaign. It was interesting to see Vinnie Piro say it's a non-issue, because in fact it is quite an issue all over the state. Headlines from the North Adams Transcript to the Malden Evening News, and it's just become really volatile in a lot of races all over. The coalition is staying together, and because of all of the responses that we've gotten, we're going to then, through our groups, monitor what happens when the different candidates are elected and see if they then vote according to their pledges, which is the thing that we need all of those folks out there who worked on the petition to keep on these folks and make sure that the way they vote in the House and the Senate is the way they sign this questionnaire and this pledge. Interestingly, Vinnie Piro responded to this. It's the first time he's ever responded to a Common Cause questionnaire, and certainly the first time he's responded to questionnaires of some of the other organizations. And so that's really wonderful. That says something about.
Thank you for calling in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We, of course, are running out of time. There are two things that I want to get to. One was, quickly, can you draw some conclusions from the what you're characterizing before as the actual facts, not just your characterizations at all, the actual facts about the campaign contributions. The other is, however, we'll do it in too short a time to address something about integrity in this campaign.
Well, candidates are certainly very influenced by who finances them. And Albano's campaigns have in the past been financed by people with small amounts of money, people in his district. That's who I think he represents. Piro's campaigns have been financed by people with a large amount of money, most of whom don't live in his district. And you certainly have to ask, does he represent the people in the district, or does he represent, on some issues, the people outside the district with a lot of money, the construction industry, the insurance industry, the other industries that have given him a lot of money. He's on the payroll of the J.F. White Construction Company of Newton. One of their executives sent a letter to all their Somerville and Medford employees saying how important it was to the J.F. White Company to have such a powerful voice in the state legislature. The J.F. White Company is, of course, not one of his constituents.
Perhaps unintentionally we have gotten to issues of integrity. I am getting a cue that we need to move on in about a minute. An impossible task to comment in a minute about integrity. Anyone want to try?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it. I was much impressed by what Senator Bachrach said, and within the discussion that Senator Bachrach mentioned at the beginning of the program was that there is a clear choice in our Senate race in Somerville and Medford, and it involved integrity, and it doesn't specifically involve integrity, as we just heard Frank's discussion of contributions to Piro's campaign and Albano's campaign. All those things lead me to believe that we have an extremely clear choice relating to integrity in what we want and who we want representing us for the next 2 years in the state legislature.
You did it in a minute. We now have a an editorial on our show. And I'd like to explain a little about that as we get that set up. Editorial is by Claire Beach, and I would like to explain the fact that, first of all, the views expressed by Claire Beach do not represent the views of Somerville Community Access TV and do not necessarily represent the views of the Somerville Producers Group as a whole. And with that as a disclaimer, I would now like to have Claire Beach have an editorial statement delivered.
There are clouds of doubt and mistrust hanging over Somerville these days. Many citizens have grave concerns over the direction our government leaders are taking. There have been indictments and promises of more to come. Somerville is not alone in this. The issue of corruption in government goes well beyond the confines of our city or our state. It is symptomatic of society at large. All those indicted will have their day in court. They may not be found guilty, but as an act of faith should pledge to resign from office if found guilty, for they would have also have been found guilty of committing a crime against democracy. However, Somerville voters now have an opportunity to make a statement. Voters must look hard at the issues. They must look at officials' past voting records, not just what they say while campaigning. Voters need to ask, are they responsive and responsible to the people? Do they guard our democratic process? Do they further the public good or their own private wealth? It is the voter who must judge for her or himself who is worthy of our electoral trust. The arguments that the system is corrupt and won't change, or that the patronage system is good because it's helpful to a few, or that it's just dirty politics as normal, must end. As voters, we must argue and demand a change in government. Other voters are looking to Somerville for a response. We can turn the tide. I challenge you, the voter, to use your electoral power to send a strong message to our public officials that we as voters demand integrity and openness in our local and state government, and we will no longer stand for corruption, closed power systems, dishonest leadership, or patronage systems. Vote for those candidates who have a proven record of honesty and integrity, who are for rules reform and are working for rules reform, and who are responsible to the people and communities they serve. Vote Tuesday, September 18th for Sal Albano, Joe Mackey, and John Bonomo. They will and we can make a difference. Thank you.
We're just about out of time for tonight, and so I would like to thank all of you for having joined us this evening. And I would like to say, I guess, in a way of closing, that the theme of the issues that we've addressed tonight is really greater responsiveness in government. In that vein, I would urge people to vote a week from today in the primaries. I'd like to thank the studio guests here in the studio with me. Warren Banbury, thanks for coming. Rick Ann Hadrian, thank you. Frank Ackerman. Thanks to all of you for watching. Let me call your attention quickly to this show. This show will be rebroadcast on the 13th. That's Thursday at 6 p.m. and a week from tonight at 8 p.m.
There's a change.
And now I'm told there's a change.
Monday the 17th at 9 o'clock.
Monday, okay. Monday the 17th, the day before the primaries at 9 p.m. So thanks again to all of you for joining us, and good night.